Hello, this is a quick message from the production team. I hope you are enjoying the Illegally Speaking podcast. Due to the current COVID-19 link crisis, the next few episodes will be recorded through our video communication software. Thanks for your understanding and do stay safe. The episode will now begin.
Welcome to the Legally Speaking podcast, powered by Kassoon Car. I'm your host, Rob Hanna.
This week, I'm delighted to be joined by Corey Kupfer, an expert strategist, deal maker, and business consultant with more than 30 years of professional negotiating experience as a successful entrepreneur and attorney. To find out more, you can visit their website at kupferlaw.com or corykupfer.com. So welcome, Corey.
It's so great to be here.
Thanks for taking the time to be with us today, Corey. There's a lot we need to get through in terms of all of your achievements and your background to date. But before we go through all of that, we do have a customary question here on the Legally Speaking podcast, which you may be familiar with. But on the scale of 1 to 10, 10 being very real, how real do you rate the hit series Suits?
Well, I say probably a 5. I have to admit, I haven't watched that many episodes of it, and I don't litigate, so you can take my 5 with a grain of salt.
Good stuff. Well, listen, I'm really keen to talk through your journey. I know as of now, obviously, you're an expert sort of strategist, deal maker, attorney, consultant, 30 years. You've achieved so much, but what's most interesting is you were an entrepreneur turned sort of attorney. So I guess it'd be really helpful for our listeners to know a bit more about your sort of life as an entrepreneur before we sort of talk about your legal world and all your other wider initiatives as well. So take us back and talk us through your entrepreneurial days.
Well, sure. I mean, so I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, in the United States, and when I was 15, I had the lemonade stands and the lawn mowing and that kind of stuff that a lot of kids do. But when I was 15, I was working for a company delivering flyers, advertising circulars door to door, and I started stopping on the route and getting my own accounts and hiring my friends to go deliver them. And as a 15-year-old kid, and I'm dating myself here, but in 1976. Through 1978, when I was 17 and left for college, I was making about $300 a week U.S., which was a lot of money in those days for a kid my age. And then, all throughout college, I ran businesses. But I came from a family where it was like, no, you go to school, you get an education, you get a job. So I got out of school, went to law school, graduated, got a big firm job in New York City. And between that and a medium-sized firm, I did about 6 years getting experience. But my entrepreneurial bug was too big. And when I was 30 years old, I sort of hung out a shingle and started my own law firm and have had it in various forms ever since, along with a number of other businesses in consulting and real estate investing and various other things.
And that's really, really interesting because, you've been involved in the legal sector and you've gone with all of this entrepreneurial flair, but just sort of taking it back. And I know, we'll talk about your podcast shortly as well. And, I know that's around sort of fueling beers, but what's your view, having spoken to lots of entrepreneurs, meeting lots of entrepreneurs? Do you think you're kind of born with it, or do you think it's something that is part of you? Give me your take on that kind of entrepreneurial aspect.
Well, I sort of break people down into 3 categories. I think there are people who will, work for somebody for the rest of their lives. And I want to make clear, I don't say that with any kind of judgment. I think self-knowledge, self-awareness is key. And there are people who are just not meant to be entrepreneurs. They're meant to be great employees, number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in the company, or number 2,000 or whatever it is. And if you're that kind of person and that's what you cut out for, then great, go excel there. And then there are natural born entrepreneurs, which I believe I'm one of them. I mean, I just can't help myself. And, my joke, and it's not original, other people say this, is that I'm unemployable at this point. I mean, but then I think you do have this middle category of what I call situational entrepreneurs. I know people who don't have that sort of natural, have to be an entrepreneur, can't work for somebody, but they are in a particular situation where, an opportunity comes up, or, a client, they're unhappy where they are, and a client says, well, why don't you just, go on your own? I'll be your first client. And they, based upon the situation, or, they're in a recession and they can't find a job and they start consulting or whatever it is. and they become situational entrepreneurs. And so I think there's three categories. I think there's the born entrepreneurs, there's the people who never be entrepreneurs, and then there's the situational entrepreneurs.
Yeah, and I really like the way you put that and sort of categorize that. And you're absolutely right. No three are better or indifferent to each other. Everyone just has their own journey that they go along. And, we don't just want to talk about all the successes of entrepreneurs as well. I think, myself included, and maybe yourself, failings and what you've learned from your failings. Are there any things that from your past? Obviously, you've been hugely successful and everything you've gone on to achieve, but, you've got to have a lot of knocks and failings along the way. So what would you say are some of your greatest learns as an entrepreneur?
Oh, listen, no question. I mean, I remember, I'll just share something quickly because, just to really highlight this point that you made. I think people who are earlier in the entrepreneurial journey are people who aren't on the entrepreneurial journey, only see, it's easy to only see the successes because that's what most of us show, right? Yeah. But I don't know a single entrepreneur who's not had ups and downs and had challenges. We did something, when I was very active in Entrepreneurs Organization, EO's a nationwide, actually a global organization of entrepreneurs. We had something called the Night of the Living Dead, where every entrepreneur shared their horror stories on their journey. For me, I mean, listen, I've been through a couple of partnership breakups over the years, which have been challenging. I'll share probably the toughest time in my entrepreneurial career, which came actually, pretty late. I mean, it was the 2008, 2009 Great Recession, where I had been in business for 20 something years. Thought I was pretty much set. Had run a very successful firm, and then the next thing I knew, my revenues are down 20, 30, 40, 50, $60,000 a month because nobody's doing deals. I have clients going out of business. They're not paying me. And, I had to spend a lot of money building out a new office. I had taken out a line of credit to do that. And, those were the days when you actually had to pay for server rooms and, $50,000 in wiring and a bunch of computers in a closet. And, and I ended up, I tell this story in my Authentic Negotiating book. And when I do talks, I ended up giving up my apartment because, money was so tight there for a while, and sleeping on an air mattress in my last front office, and I had to make sure fortunately we had a shower in the office. I had to make sure I got up, in time to shower and be dressed before my employees came into work. And that was just now 11, 12 years ago. I ended up with $325,000 in debt. And in fact, a lot of the principles in my Authentic Negotiating book that I developed over the years crystallized for me at that time because, it's easy to advise other people on, working for clients on how to negotiate things or negotiate things that are easy yourself. But when you're in those kind of challenging situations and it really counts and it's your livelihood and your family and paying the rent and eating, the rubber hits the road. So, a lot of the, what got me out of that with my reputation intact, without declaring bankruptcy, without short selling the house that I had, that was, my weekend home that was underwater, economically, like people recommended to me, and to pay everybody back, because that was my commitment, was all of the things that I put in my Authentic Negotiating book. And, it was a humbling time. And what I learned and what I preach to people, is to be in communication, be transparent, decide what you're going to do. For me, it was my moral compass that had me say, no, I made these commitments. I'm going to pay back every dollar. I don't judge people who make a different decision, but for me, that was the decision. And, it was a tough time, but we got through it and, came back even stronger.
Yeah, and that's a fascinating story. And what I really like about that is, and that shows that you're a true entrepreneur in my eyes as well, is that very much that whatever it takes mentality. You're talking about sleeping on, airbed mattresses, talking about sort of, complete skin in the game. You're talking about staying true to your values at all costs. And yeah, I think that's just a wonderful story and hopefully a real inspiration to lots of other people. And we should point out that your book is very much available on Amazon, and, it really is worth people sort of, getting involved and giving that a listen, and read, because I think around that sort of authentic negotiating and getting deals done, which is very much what you're known for, I think really has sort of helped you and can help so many other people. And more so in current times, given the current situation, we are in a bit of a global, I don't like to use the word lightly, crisis, but, we are going through a pandemic. Is there anything you would share, given sort of, having been through tough times, maybe recessions, bad experience before, that you would give as some advice for people, or just to kind of keep people positive at this point in time, Corey?
Yeah, well, I think what you just said is the first key, right? I mean, I believe that our mental state, our spiritual state, our emotional state is where everything starts, right? Because you see it now already, in these times. I'm sure you've seen it with your business colleagues and friends or whatever. Some of them are in a total panic or depression, and some of them, and I actually did I did a little post on this. I think it was about a week ago, where one of the things I observed is that entrepreneurs and business leaders tend to be in a much more positive mind state than employees and some of the self-employed folks who haven't really built a business, that beyond themselves. And it's not universally true, but and this is anecdotal. I haven't done a study, but that's what I've been noticing. And I think maybe in part it's because as entrepreneurs and business leaders, we feel maybe we have more control, or we're just generally more optimistic people in general. But I think mindset, everything for me starts with mindset, because I actually, this is going to get to a place where people may not expect it to go on a legally speaking podcast. But listen, I believe in energy. I really do. I believe, I don't believe in the law of attraction in the oversimplistic way that some people talk about it. It's not what you think about, you bring about, but it's based upon what Bob Proctor calls the law of vibration. It's the vibration you're in. So, if you truly believe that things are going to be, go bad, they're more likely to go bad. And that's because, one, quantum physics has shown that everything is energy. It's, it's not like the science of that has sort of come together with Eastern spiritual consciousness. So everything is energy, and it does affect each other. But even if you don't believe that, right? If you are in a place of scarcity or fear or, any of those things that can come up in these times, then you're much less likely to be motivated. You're much less likely to think clearly. You're much less likely to take the actions that you need to take that will put you in the best position, in challenging times. So, even if you don't believe in the energy thing, it's sort of, your mindset and your actions and your, and your ability to be creative. So the first thing I always say to people is, listen, work on your mindset. And then, some of the lessons from, the 2008 recession, be in communication with people, be honest with people, be authentic with people. If you can't pay a bill, don't hide out, call the creditor, work something out. I remember back in those days, there were people who wanted, $15,000 from me. And I was like, I can pay you $75 a month, but you'll get paid. So I think, start with the mindset, and then listen, hopefully you are clear on what your core values are, at this time. And if you're not, please get clear on them. And, it's easy to be consistent with our core values when times are good, but when times are challenging or when you get really tested, right? Because it's easy to do things out of fear. And so I would say get reconnected to your core values, and you will be much better off in the short term and in the long term, especially if you act from that place as opposed to a place of fear or scarcity.
So, Corey, in these times, as you'll know, here in the UK, we're now in lockdown. I know you guys over in the US have been in lockdown as well. How have you been dealing with that as a law firm, and how's that impacted you?
Well, what's been really interesting for us, Robert, is that if this were, 5+ years ago, it would have impacted us significantly. But frankly, for the most part, it has not, from a business point of view, operations point of view, has not affected us really at all. And that seems like a strange comment. But the reason is this. About 5 years ago, when I split up a partnership and reestablished my firm, as I sort of mentioned earlier, I did sort of an analysis of the business model, and I looked at it, and I actually tracked how many times we met with clients in the office, and it was almost never. And this comes from somebody who most of my career, if you didn't meet with a client, you didn't, or a prospect, you didn't get the work. Nowadays, everybody's busy. Nobody wants to travel. I'm talking even before, the pandemic or anything. People just wouldn't meet. So when I reestablished my firm after the partnership breakup, my own firm 5 years ago, I essentially, we have an office address, we have meeting space, but we effectively went virtual. And so my whole team has been working, from home with a place to come in if we have meetings or if we want to gather. already. And, so we do a lot on Zoom video. We do a lot, obviously on conference call. Nowadays, listen, if you have a phone line and an internet connection and, a computer and email, for what I do, because I don't go to court, I do deals, I do negotiations, we do contracts. We can work from anywhere. So my team has been working remotely. We have a great self-starting, team who get the work done. So when this happened, we're just continuing to operate under our business model, which is very different than what's happened with most law firms who have to make a major shift.
I think that's a major wake up maybe to some law firms who have been a bit behind the curve in terms of actually appreciating the need to be, more virtually operating or be more with the tech times. So I think it's definitely going to kickstart a lot of law firms into rethinking their strategy, right?
No, no question about it. I mean, I think a lot of businesses in general, but certainly law firms, because, frankly, we tend to be behind the times often on technology and on business models. And, for me, I mean, I think what a lot of lawyers who manage people, partners, are going to have to get past is, this sort of traditional model of feeling like they need their associates and their staff sort of under their thumb and physically there. And, there are different ways that you can do it, virtually. But it can work, and it's worked very, very well. And frankly, it's also allowed me to get good talent. Who one of my main associates, for example, is a mother of 2 children, and she loves the ability to work virtually because she can be home when the kids come home from school, and then make some dinner or spend some time with them and get back to work later when she wants to. And for me, I've always managed not by micromanaging people's tasks, but by managing by expectations for results. So, we have to satisfy clients' needs. We have to keep them happy. I'm going to hold people accountable to that, but I don't care when and how you do it, as long as the clients are being satisfied and you're available, for meetings and that kind of stuff. And, we've done that very successfully virtually for the last 5 years. So when this pandemic came, it's really business as usual for us.
Yeah, no, well said. Well said. What I also want to talk to you about, Corey, is, and we kind of you gave a light overview of your career to date, but, it's kind of maybe take us a bit in a bit more detail, how, what were the practical steps you took from your time in other law firms to then, how did you set up your, New York, hugely successful current firm where you stand today? Give some of the sort of practical steps and things that you did and what you learned along the way.
Sure. So as I said, I put in about 6 years at a very large U.S. firm and then a medium-sized firm. And the reason I moved from the large firm to the medium-sized firm is because at the large firm I was doing deals, which is great. I mean, it's really formed a lot of my the basis for what I do now. But it was all huge deals. It was big leverage buyouts and public securities work and big mergers and acquisitions. And I knew I wanted to go out on my own, and I sort of knew that General Electric Credit Corp and people like that were clients of my old firm were not going to give me business when I hung out my little shingle from day one, right? So I needed to get some of the smaller deal, general corporate counsel contract experience. So I went to a medium-sized firm to get that that more sort of day-to-day corporate and medium and smaller firm experience. And then once I had that, it was, you want to talk about recessions, it was end of 1991, beginning of 1992, which was a recession in the U.S. When I started my firm, and everybody told me I was crazy, and I just was done. I couldn't work for somebody anymore, talking about this natural born entrepreneur thing. Didn't leave with a book of business, started with nothing because the firm I was at had long-term institutional clients. So although I had some good relationships, the clients weren't moving at that time. And I literally started my firm networking. I mean, I went to every networking event that there was. I mean, you name it. I was in networking events in New York, in New Jersey, in Connecticut, evenings and mornings, and I started building it from there. In New York, there was something called the Union Legal Plan. So in other words, it was a benefit that the union provided to their teachers in New York City, and they had a panel of lawyers who would work on a significantly reduced fee. So I got signed up for that, started doing some work for teachers at a very, very reduced rate. And I remember my friends at the big firms were like, why are you working for a third of the rate that you could charge? And I said to them, because you don't understand. If my menu is zero or a third, not a third or triple, right? So you take what you can get. And I just hustled, built it up from nothing. Within a year and a half, I brought in a partner. because I had built up enough business somehow that was worth about 1.5 attorneys worth. And I had a friend of mine who we used to work together at a prior firm, and he was a litigator. And in the early days, I was doing a little bit of everything. I was going to court. I didn't know what I was doing. I was calling him for advice. And then somehow I convinced him to leave a big firm and join me. And, we built the thing over, the next decade to, 9 attorneys and, running a couple $1 million in revenue and all that kind of stuff. And in the beginning it was hustle. Over time it's evolved. I don't do any of that kind of, and haven't for many years, that kind of business card handout networking anymore, but it's evolved into being a member of various organizations like Entrepreneurial Organization and over the years and things like that, where I've made great contacts. It's evolved into speaking, which is a one-to-many as opposed to a one-to-one, which develops a lot of business to me. And then, as you alluded to, books, podcasts, putting out content online, and and the business model has continued to evolve. And we've fortunately, with a couple of hiccups during recessions, have continued to grow significantly.
Yeah, and that's great. And what I also pick up from that as well, just gleaming on the thing of entrepreneurship, is you've always run at the problem rather than running away from the problem. And you use the word hustling a lot. And I think there's a real difference between there's hustling and and it's that action, isn't it? Be prepared to take action. We're in a downturn or in a crisis moment at the moment. You can't run away from the problem. You've got to take it face on. You've got to tackle it, and you've got to ultimately be prepared to take that action. And I think that's really sage advice that you've offered there. I think there's so much else we want to talk about, and you've touched on a few of the points as well, because you're right, you've spoken for the Entrepreneurs Organization, Fidelity Institutional Wealth Services, New York State Bar, Move the Crowd, Citi, the list goes on and on and on and on and on. Are there any kind of top things that, when you are speaking, that you always relay to people that might be quite helpful for people listening in as sort of just takeaways?
Well, yeah, so there's a few different things that I speak on. We all the deal making and negotiating, I do workshops on that. I speak a lot in the financial services industry because I've developed a real niche in that industry. And that's, and that's not a direct answer to your question, but it is a tip for people that, if you can niche down and have a specific area where you really become known as an attorney as opposed to being a generalist, it really makes a difference. But a lot of the speaking I do, and it's true about the content I put out. It's the reason for the book. I work with companies to help them grow, right? And we do that, through inorganic growth or deal-driven growth. And that's not just big mergers and acquisitions. It's, everything from licensing to joint ventures, strategic alliances, affiliate deals. There's so many, I can go on and on. I won't. But there's so many types of deals that smaller companies to large companies can do with or without capital. And really the message is, hey, every company, you're focusing on organic growth, sales, marketing, getting more customers, and you need to do that. If you can't sell a service or product, you shouldn't be in business. But there's only a small percentage of companies that also grow inorganically through deal-driven growth. And there's so many opportunities out there to do strategic alliances and joint ventures and licensing and joint marketing, whatever it is, that is a growth opportunity, both in good times and in downturns. And it's at least something you should be considering if you're in business and you're not growing as quickly as you'd like.
Okay. And then just in terms of, modern day attorneys, lawyers, maybe they are in a firm at the moment, they're getting itchy feet. What advice would you give to them if they were to, to take the step, to take that step to maybe set up their own firm? Because, naturally there is a conception, it's not all, and I will caveat it's not all, but, most people in the legal profession might be slightly risk averse and, all making that step. Is it right? Is it not? You gave a fascinating example of the fact moving with, not much business whatsoever and just outright hustling. But looking back on people in the modern world, the legal sector has changed significantly. What advice would you give to people who maybe, encouraging them to maybe set up their own firms?
Yeah. So, listen, like you said, our, the profession tends to lean towards the risk averse in terms of personality and training, no question. And, not as many people are going to make, I was paying my rent on credit cards and had over $100,000 in debt when I first started my firm, until I started making money. And, a lot of people aren't going to do that. But I would say a couple of things. First of all, we're in a very different time than when I started. Okay. When I split up a business partnership, a law partnership about 5 years ago, and restarted a firm, it was basically a few laptops, computers, and $600 a month in cloud programs, and you're up and running. So first of all, the investment that you need to make nowadays is a lot less than it used to be to get started because of technology. and because of the fact that there's not a huge, you don't need a huge office with books in a conference room these days necessarily, right? People almost never meet in person anymore. So that's shifted. The second thing is, obviously, there are some people who will be able to lead with a book of business, which cushions it. But the third thing is, listen, what drove me is that I had a vision of a way that I thought I could do it better. There were things that I didn't like about the way clients were being handled, about the way attorneys and staff were being treated, at least in the New York City big firm, world in those days. It was very hierarchical, and it was very, at times, frankly, abusive. In terms of the way some of the partners would treat the associates and how everybody would treat the staff, and that was just not in keeping with my values and vision. So I had a bigger vision of what I wanted to do, and I think a lot of people leave a place, or start their own firm because they don't like, and that's a good motivator if you're unhappy with something. But I would really encourage you to also have that positive pull, not just running from something, but create a vision for what you want to create. Because when things get tough, and they will, right? Usually, I mean, unless, you're leaving someplace with $1 million book of business and you're all set, the clients are coming with you. And even in those cases, you're probably going to have challenges, right? But it may get tough, and there are ups and downs. And if you don't have a bigger vision that's pulling you forward, and a way you want to serve clients, and a way you want to treat employees, and a way you want to grow your business, and the impact that maybe you want to have in the community and society with your time and the money you make and the influence you get, then it's tougher. But when you have that bigger vision, it's easier in those tough times to reconnect to that and push through and hustle.
Yeah, well said, well said. And you mentioned again, we are in a completely new world. We're in a tech world, whether people like it or not. And so, one of the things you talked about going back to your journey was, you're getting out there, hustling, handing out business cards, meeting people. That's almost would be the wrong advice now in the modern world in terms of e-networking and networking your way out there with the modern time. Is there anything you would say, or you do, or you continue to do? Obviously, you can never put the price on, obviously, face-to-face networking is great, but for people to get mass networking that's effective networking, is there anything tips you would give, particularly moving into this sort of world that we're operating now?
Well, listen, we're in a world of content, right? So, for many, many years, even though I built my firm to a very successful firm through very traditional means, right? Networking, providing great services for people, getting referrals, building good centers of influence, referral sources, that kind of stuff. One of the things that always sort of frustrated me, though, was how do I keep top of mind with all my clients, right? And in the old days, attorneys used to send out maybe snail mail, newsletters, and everybody was sort of doing the same thing. And it was, it was just tough. And it would drive me crazy occasionally when I would see a client, they said, oh, we just did X, and it was something we could have handled for them. And they didn't bring it to us just because they didn't realize we didn't do it, right? Or, or with referral sources, if you're not top of mind, they may give it to someone else. So one of the things that I've done recently, and this is, I think, the best play right now, is we put out a lot of content, online, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. We've been starting to do some Instagram stuff. LinkedIn's the biggest one for me, where my clients are. And we put out a lot of valuable content for free, right? Just things on deals, things on negotiating, things on, the financial services and registered investment advisor space, where we do a lot, on tech, that kind of stuff. And it keeps you top of mind. I can't tell you. I mean, if I haven't talked to somebody in a while and I get on the phone with them, almost to a person, they will say to me, Corey, I've been reading your blogs. Corey, I've been looking at what you're doing on LinkedIn. Corey, I listened to your podcast, your podcast. I mean, so it's a way to keep top of mind. Now, here's the interesting part. For the most part, I mean, there are some things that I could directly trace. Oh, I put out the book. I got this speaking engagement because of the book, and I got X amount of business from that. But for the most part, it's hard to trace directly back. But what I know is when we started heavily putting out content about 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, in anticipation of my book coming out and just recognizing the new model, our business has grown, significantly every year. I mean, we were up 60% last year off of a pretty big base already. And I attribute that to having an understanding of the digital landscape and the desire for content and how people look for you nowadays, which is very different than handing out a business card at an in-person networking event, which I'm not saying don't do, but you got to be online. You got to be giving value.
Absolutely. And that's what I was going to say. It's continuous content that's value add to your audiences. And people, like you say, will grow with you during they may be dormant. You may not hear from them for 3-6 months, but they're watching you and you'll be able to articulate your story. You're adding value to them. And it's so great. And I guess that's just a great success story. And people, again, listening in, that is the future. If you fail to, you've got to find your platform. I'm a bit like you. LinkedIn's where I tend to go all in because we've got lots of people listening in and watching us. But, find your platforms, find out what works for you, put decent content out there that adds value to your networks, and you will see wins in the long term. And that leads us on to, we've touched on it a few times, but one of my favorite podcasts, and I'm not just saying that because you're on the show today, but the Fueling the Deals podcast, because I just love doing deals. It's what's making me tick as an entrepreneur business owner. So tell people a bit more who may be new to Fueling the Deals what that's all about, and give us a bit of an overview.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what's interesting for me is up until about maybe 3-4 years ago, I had never listened to a podcast at all, not a single podcast. And then, I won't tell the story on how I started getting into them a little bit, and then I started studying the model. And, what I found out is a few things. The average podcast doesn't even last 15 episodes. So, what I would say to you, folks out there, listeners, if you're thinking about doing a podcast, study the model and figure out what works, and don't do it unless you're committed to it. And that's sort of the way I operate. I spend a little time figuring out what it is, and I'm either all in or I'm not in, right? So we're now 60 some odd episodes in, over a year in. We do a weekly podcast. And what's been great about the Fueling Deals podcast is that it was always intended to be a sort of a niche podcast, right? I'm not looking to get 1 million downloads. It's not a general interest podcast. What it is, it's directed towards, people like who are my clients, or like my clients, my prospects. And also, I'm happy if it gives value to somebody I'll never, ever work with. But it's, for entrepreneurs and business leaders who are looking to grow and maybe frustrated that they're not growing as quickly as they'd like through the organic growth route, as I said before. So, we have guests on that are entrepreneurs who have done all kinds of types of deals, service providers like investment bankers and business brokers and consultants and valuation people. We have them share their journeys, their stories, their expertise, and where they came from, sort of like, what I'm doing here on your podcast. And the whole intention is, what listeners have told me is, it's a great way for them to really get a feel for the deal landscape, to understand what's out there, and then to really hear people's stories on how they've done some very interesting deals to help them grow. It's been great for us because, it's a way to touch people. It's a way to keep the profile up, but it's also a way to build relationships. I mean, similar to what you did here. I mean, we connected online. And this is a great example, right, Robert? We connected online, right, through LinkedIn. Yeah. We had a call, we got to know each other's, as people, as businesses. And then, I'm a guest on your podcast, right? So now you and I have a relationship that will continue to build. And that's what I've done with the Fueling Deals podcast, to continue to build relationships. It's produced business for me, and it's a way that we give valuable content out to people. And, it's just, and it's fun. And I love doing it. So that's the other thing. Any of these things, that listeners are thinking about doing, find what you love to do. For me, doing a podcast, interviewing people, I never, I could do that all day. I don't, right? Because I have other things. But, I love doing it. So find that medium where you love doing it, because it's going to come across to your audience.
Yeah, and I love that. And you're absolutely right. If you want to do a podcast, be serious about it, be proactive, have a plan, and you've just got to make sure that you're really targeting the right people. And I love that Fueling the Deals, because some of your guests you've had on, some of their stories, I think that was the landscape business. One of your guests was on. I was hearing one of their highlights and their journey. So it really is inspiring. So I absolutely just love that. And Corey, so many of your insights just generally in business are obviously featured in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Investment News, financialplanning.com. Again, the list goes on and on and on. But if we were to kind of close with some sort of casing comments or some summary points that would be helpful for people as lawyers, business owners, what would you say are sort of your top 3 tips to people? Because you believe in values and growth and entrepreneurship, what are your 3 tips?
I would say number 1 is get clear on your values and the value that you want to provide. All right. And then number 2 is be of service. Like, I come from a service mentality. Okay. I truly believe that when you are of service to people, and by the way, you value yourself, right? So you're not giving away the value that I mean, you give it away some things in content and make a difference, but in terms of the service you ultimately provide, you want to, so maybe the third tip is value yourself, right? Properly, but be of service. Okay. If you come from a place of, just wanting to, make money or, selfish place, that's actually when you don't grow. When you provide value and you're of service to people, then, the money will come. Everything will take care of itself. So get connected with your core values, be of service, and then know and honor your value. So, for example, we are not the least expensive solution out there by far. All right. We're not the most expensive, but I know that for whatever we charge, whether it's for legal services or for my speaking, that I'm going to give value at or beyond that to the audience. So I own my value and I provide service.
Great stuff. Well, Corey, it's been an absolute pleasure. Expert strategist, deal maker, business consultant, 30 years professional experience negotiating, a successful entrepreneur attorney. I don't know how we managed to condense that into such a small time frame, but people most definitely should check out your LinkedIn if they've not. They should definitely check out your podcast, and definitely we're going to see you again on the Legally Speaking podcast. So on behalf of all of us, thanks so much for sharing all your insights today, and wishing you lots of continued success as well during this tough time.
Robert, it's such a pleasure to be on. I really appreciate it. And hopefully, provided some value to your audience. And folks, this too shall pass.